In the spring of 1221, on the burning banks of the Indus River, the fate of an empire narrowed to a single, irreversible moment. The sun hung heavy over the water, the current wide and unforgiving. Behind him thundered the most disciplined cavalry force the medieval world had ever seen. Before him surged a river that promised either survival or death. Caught between steel and current stood Jalal ad-Din, a young ruler facing the full weight of history. This was not merely a battlefield encounter. It was not about walls, banners, or ceremonial declarations. It was about pressure, sustained, calculated, relentless pressure. For months, perhaps years in spirit, that pressure had been building. The army pursuing him did not tire, did not hesitate, did not negotiate half measures. It advanced with purpose. At its head was Genghis Khan, a leader who understood that unfinished threats eventually return stronger. The scene at the Indus was more than a clash of cavalry and courage. It was a test of leadership under constraint. One man fought to preserve a collapsing empire. The other fought to ensure that no fragment of resistance survived to regroup. The outcome would not only decide the fate of the Khwarezmian state, it would demonstrate, with stark clarity, what relentless pursuit can accomplish when guided by structure and absolute resolve. Sometimes history turns not on the size of an army, but on the will to follow through. At the Indus River, that will reshape the world. The road to the Indus River did not begin with cavalry charges or burning cities. It began with diplomacy and with a decision that transformed commerce into catastrophe. In the years before 1221, Genghis Khan was not yet focused on destroying the Khwarezmian Empire. His ambitions at that moment leaned toward trade. The Silk Road offered opportunity. Caravans moved silk, silver, spices, and ideas across Central Asia. Stability meant profit. Profit meant growth. To formalize peaceful relations, Genghis Khan sent envoys westward to the court of Muhammad II of Khwarezm, ruler of a vast and wealthy empire stretching across Persia and Central Asia. The message was straightforward: open trade routes, mutual recognition, coexistence. But suspicion poisoned judgment. When a Mongol trade caravan was accused of espionage in the city of Otrur, its members were executed. Soon after, the diplomatic envoys sent to demand accountability were killed as well. In the modern world, we understand that the murder of ambassadors crosses a line that destabilizes entire systems. In the 13th century, it was no different. For Genghis Khan, this was not merely an insult. It was a violation of order. Diplomacy, once broken, required a response that would deter future betrayal. In his worldview, authority rested on credibility. If such an act went unanswered, the perception of weakness would ripple outward. Yet the empire that committed this act was not as secure as it appeared. Shah Muhammad II ruled over a sprawling territory, but its cohesion was fragile. Regional governors held significant autonomy. Loyalty was uneven. Communication across vast distances was slow. Wealth and fortified cities projected strength, but internal unity was thin. What might have remained a contained trade dispute hardened into total war. The Mongol response was not symbolic. It was systematic. Multiple armies advanced along coordinated routes. Cities that resisted were besieged with calculated precision. The message was unmistakable. An offense against order would be met with overwhelming force. Thus, from a diplomatic breakdown emerged a campaign that would dismantle an empire. The path to the Indus River was paved not simply by ambition, but by a decision that turned mistrust into annihilation. When the Mongol response came, it did not resemble the slow, grinding wars that many empires were accustomed to fighting. It moved with clarity, coordination, and a level of operational discipline that stunned the medieval world. Genghis Khan did not launch a single column westward in symbolic retaliation. He unleashed a synchronized campaign designed to fracture the Khwarezmian Empire from multiple directions at once. The city of Bokhara was among the first to feel the impact. Wealthy and confident behind its walls, it represented the prosperity of the Silk Road. Yet walls proved less decisive than mobility. Mongol forces bypassed traditional expectations of siege warfare, maneuvering with astonishing speed across deserts that defenders believed impassable. When Bokhara fell, it sent a signal across the region. No distance was safe, no barrier absolute. Soon after, Samarkand, larger, richer, and more fortified, faced the same fate. Here, the Mongols demonstrated not only ferocity but structure. Engineers, siege specialists, cavalry units, and intelligence networks worked in concert. Defenders expecting a chaotic horde encountered instead a coordinated war machine. The siege was methodical. Morale inside the city eroded as rapidly as its defenses. What distinguished the invasion was its multi-front coordination. Separate Mongol armies advanced along divergent routes, converging on strategic centers while cutting off retreat and reinforcement. Communication across vast distances relied on disciplined relay systems. Orders traveled quickly. Adjustments were made in real time. It was not brute force alone that overwhelmed the Khwarezmian defenses, it was systemic execution. Equally powerful was psychological warfare. News of one city's destruction preceded the arrival of Mongol forces at the next. Rumors amplified fear. Some cities surrendered without prolonged resistance, calculating that defiance would bring annihilation. Speed magnified terror. The Mongols appeared unpredictable yet relentlessly organized, capable of striking where least expected. For observers then, and for leaders reflecting today, the lesson is clear. Strength is not measured solely by numbers, but by cohesion. The invasion of Khwarezm revealed an institution operating with unified command and shared purpose. Against such integration, fragmented authority struggled to respond. The road to the Indus River was being cleared, not through chance, but through disciplined design. As the Khwarezmian Empire began to fracture under sustained assault, one figure emerged from the wreckage with a markedly different temperament from his father. Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu was not inclined toward retreat. Where Muhammad II of Khwarezm hesitated and withdrew westward, watching his authority dissolve city by city, his son chose confrontation. In moments of institutional collapse, leadership often reveals itself not in comfort but under compression. Jalal ad-Din stepped into that compression willingly. He gathered what forces he could: loyal retainers, scattered commanders, soldiers who still believed resistance mattered. Afghanistan's harsh terrain became his temporary shield. In its mountains and narrow passes, mobility favored the defender more than the invader. There, he managed to slow Mongol detachments and even claim limited tactical successes. These were not decisive victories, but they were meaningful. They signaled that the empire's spirit had not entirely evaporated. Courage, however, is a complicated asset. It inspires followers, but it does not automatically compensate for structural weakness. Jalal ad-Din possessed personal bravery and battlefield presence. Chroniclers describe him fighting at the front, rallying troops when formations faltered. For men facing what seemed like an unstoppable machine, that visibility mattered. It bought time. It restored morale, however briefly. Yet inevitability loomed. The Mongol war system was not dependent on a single engagement. It adapted. It redirected. It pressed forward with patience that bordered on cold certainty. Jalal ad-Din understood that surrender would erase any remaining legitimacy. He also understood that flight without resistance would confirm collapse. So he chose to stand, again and again, even as resources dwindled. In this contrast, the human dimension of the campaign becomes clear. On one side stood a leader backed by an integrated institution, hardened through years of unified command. On the other stood a prince attempting to reconstruct coherence from fragments. Jalal ad-Din refused to flee into obscurity. He positioned himself as the last embodiment of Khwarezmian resistance. For viewers reflecting from a modern vantage point, his role is both admirable and tragic. He represents the power of individual resolve. But he also illustrates a harder truth. Courage, without unified support and systemic stability, can delay defeat, but rarely prevent it. After the fall of the major Khwarezmian cities, the campaign might have ended in partial victory. Many rulers in history would have declared success and consolidated their gains. But Genghis Khan did not believe in unfinished conflicts. As long as Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu remained in the field, resistance retained a heartbeat. And so began one of the most relentless pursuits of the medieval era. The chase stretched across punishing geography, through the jagged mountains of Afghanistan, across arid plains, and into harsh, unfamiliar terrain. These were not easy routes for cavalry. Supply lines grew thin. Climate shifted dramatically from freezing elevations to blistering valleys. Yet the Mongol army did not fragment under strain. It adapted. Mobility was not simply a tactic, it was embedded into the system. Units could separate, regroup, and pivot without losing cohesion. What made this pursuit extraordinary was not speed alone, but structure. The Mongol military operated through a disciplined decimal organization, units of tens, hundreds, thousands, each accountable within a chain of command that functioned even at great distances from the core leadership. Commanders understood intent, not just orders. When terrain shifted or opportunities appeared, they adjusted without chaos. That adaptability turned obstacles into temporary delays rather than permanent barriers. Equally critical were intelligence networks in motion. Scouts rode far ahead, mapping routes, tracking movements, gathering information from local populations. Messages relayed rapidly across detachments ensured that Jalal ad-Din's maneuvers rarely went unnoticed for long. In modern terms, this was real-time situational awareness in an age without electronic communication. The Mongols compensated with discipline and preparation. It would be easy to frame the campaign as vengeance for earlier insults. But the deeper logic was strategic. Leaving a rival leader free meant leaving space for rebellion. Stability required closure. The pursuit was not emotional, it was calculated. It communicated to allies and enemies alike that resistance would not fade into obscurity. It would be followed, cornered, and resolved. For leaders today, the principle is familiar. Momentum, once established, must be sustained. Objectives cannot be pursued halfway. Across mountains and deserts, the Mongol advance signaled something unmistakable. Discipline, when paired with clarity of purpose, can endure far beyond the limits of comfort. By the spring of 1221, the long pursuit reached its inevitable conclusion on the banks of the Indus River. Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu found himself cornered, his remaining forces pressed between a surging river and the advancing army of Genghis Khan. There was no fortified city at his back, no reinforcements marching to relieve him, only water ahead and cavalry behind. It was the kind of moment that compresses history into a single, irreversible decision. The Mongol army did not descend in disorder. Their decimal units, disciplined formations of tens, hundreds, and thousands, moved with practiced coordination. Each commander understood his role within the larger design. Orders flowed through the ranks with clarity. What appeared to some as overwhelming chaos was, in fact, controlled execution. The engagement began with maneuver rather than collision. Mongol cavalry employed feigned retreats, drawing segments of Jalal ad-Din's army out of formation. As gaps opened, mounted archers unleashed volleys that destabilized defensive lines. When confusion spread, heavier units pivoted and struck with precision. It was a choreography of movement refined over years of campaigning. Against such integration, fragmented resistance struggled to respond. The river at their backs intensified the pressure. Horses panicked near the water's edge. Soldiers were driven into narrowing space, caught between advancing lances and a relentless current. The battlefield became a corridor of desperation. Yet in the midst of collapse, Jalal ad-Din fought visibly and fiercely, rallying what remained of his troops. His presence embodied defiance, even as the structure around him disintegrated. Then came the moment that would echo through chronicles for centuries. Seeing defeat as inevitable, Jalal ad-Din reportedly spurred his horse toward a steep embankment and leapt into the Indus River below. It was an act of extraordinary audacity. Against the force of the current, he survived, reaching the opposite bank and escaping into exile. From the shore, Genghis Khan is said to have admired the courage of his adversary, even as victory belonged decisively to the Mongols. With that leap, organized Khwarezmian resistance effectively collapsed. The empire that had once commanded trade routes and fortified cities dissolved at the water's edge. The Battle of the Indus River was not the largest confrontation of the campaign, but it was its defining climax, where relentless pursuit achieved final resolution and an empire broke under sustained pressure. The dust settled along the Indus River, but the consequences of that day extended far beyond the battlefield. The clash in 1221 was not simply a military victory for Genghis Khan. It was a decisive demonstration of how power functions when structure and leadership align. At its core, the campaign exposed a fundamental contrast: fragmented authority versus unified command. The Khwarezmian Empire possessed wealth, cities, and manpower. Yet when crisis struck, its authority fractured. Regional leaders hesitated. Communication faltered. Loyalty thinned under pressure. By contrast, the Mongol system operated as an integrated institution. Orders moved efficiently through disciplined ranks. Commanders understood not just tactics, but intent. Unity amplified strength, fragmentation magnified weakness. It is a lesson that resonates far beyond medieval warfare. The battle also underscored the difference between personal valor and institutional durability. Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu displayed undeniable courage. His leap into the river became legendary. Yet bravery alone could not compensate for systemic instability. The Mongol army functioned cohesively regardless of individual heroics. Institutional strength, not isolated acts of valor, determined the outcome. Momentum played an equally critical role. Many leaders achieve initial success but lose resolve before consolidation is complete. Genghis Khan's relentless pursuit demonstrated the power of follow-through. He did not allow distance, terrain, or fatigue to dilute strategic objectives. Once momentum was established, it was sustained until resistance collapsed entirely. In modern terms, this reflects execution discipline, the capacity to carry a plan beyond its most comfortable phase. There was also a psychological dimension. Relentless execution reshapes perception. News of the Mongol advance traveled quickly across Eurasia. Rulers recalibrated their strategies. Merchants reconsidered routes. The image of inevitability became a strategic asset. When opponents believe resistance is futile, conflict often resolves more swiftly. In the decades that followed, the stability imposed by Mongol dominance contributed to what historians call the Pax Mongolica. Trade networks expanded. Cultural exchange intensified across vast distances. While the conquests brought undeniable devastation, they also reconfigured global connectivity in lasting ways. For leaders today, whether in business, creative industries, or governance, the principles remain relevant. Unity of command, structural resilience, disciplined follow-through, and clarity of purpose can determine whether organizations endure pressure or dissolve under it. The Indus was not merely a riverbank, it was a proving ground for systemic power. In the end, the Battle of the Indus River was not defined solely by cavalry charges or a desperate leap into rushing water. It was defined by a deeper truth. When structure overcomes chaos, outcomes shift decisively. On one side of the river stood an army bound together by unified command, disciplined systems, and unwavering follow-through. On the other stood courage without cohesion. History recorded the result. The river itself becomes a powerful symbol. It represents pressure, the kind that narrows options, exposes weaknesses, and forces leaders to act without the comfort of delay. Every generation faces its own version of that river. Markets tighten. Competition accelerates. Uncertainty rises. In those moments, leadership under constraint determines survival. It is not charisma alone, nor bold rhetoric, but preparation, clarity, and institutional strength that carry organizations across turbulent currents. For modern builders, entrepreneurs launching ventures, executives steering companies, creators shaping ideas, the lessons from 1221 remain strikingly relevant. Momentum must be sustained. Objectives must be carried through to completion. Fragmented authority invites collapse, while unified direction compounds strength. Vision without structure falters. Structure without resolve stagnates. But when both align, even formidable obstacles yield. The Battle of the Indus River still matters because it reveals a pattern that repeats across centuries. disciplined systems outlast improvised reactions. Empires, companies, and institutions rise or fall on that principle. If this exploration has given you a deeper perspective on leadership, strategy, and the forces that shape history, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here, we look beyond dramatic events to uncover the enduring principles behind them. Like the video, share it with others who value strategic insight, and join a community committed to understanding how the past continues to inform the decisions we make today.